Welcome to Deadline, a discussion and critique by some of Washington's most seasoned journalists and pundits on how the media has covered the week's news events without the shouting heard on those other news programs. I'm your host, Wayne Matson. Joining me on the panel this week are Eric Hensel from Murray Hill, Mohammed Awis, analyst, and Paul Magno with the group Witness for Peace. Welcome, everyone, to Deadline.
Thank you.
Good to be here. Hi.
President Obama's job plan looks like a non-starter in Congress. So Obama has been on a road trip recently through Virginia and North Carolina, has been attending some expensive fundraising dinners in Hollywood and San Francisco, getting fat checks from the 1 percentile, while many on the Occupy Wall Street movement seem to be agreeing with the Tea Party and asking, does Obama really get it? And is he a 1 percenter or is he a 99 percenter? Well, let's talk about what's going on. We've had this jobs bill. It also had some nice little things for the corporations, some free trade agreements. I think it was Colombia, Panama, and South Korea. South Korean president was here and amid a lot of pomp and circumstance. Obama's out. He did a trip through Virginia, North Carolina, and now he's out in Hollywood and San Francisco getting big checks from fat cat donors. People Occupy Wall Street and others are saying, wait a minute, does Obama really understand what's going on? He's saying some words about the Occupy movement, but does he really understand? Eric, do you think that the president really gets it with what's going on out there on the streets?
It's a complicated question because it's not just the president, it's everyone who surrounds the president. And I don't think the culture that he's embedded within really gets it. I mean, I just don't see them connecting with the 99 very well. Although I can say, I think he might be taking a play out of Clinton's re-election campaign, where Clinton waged a very aggressive sort of out there primary, even though he was unopposed in '96. And on one hand, people thought, what was he doing? But clearly that was his way to try to reconnect with people and get past some of the difficulty he was having. And maybe you'll see something like that. Maybe you'll see somebody who gets into a campaign swing and actually has a mechanism to more directly connect to people and get into that campaign mode and maybe have more people who have access to him that can actually talk to him more concretely about what's happening. But right now, no, I don't think he's got the team that can really connect the understanding to action. And then even if he did, he has Congress. So there's really, that's a whole other problem.
Mohammed, we heard during the Arab Spring in Tunisia, Egypt, President Obama, at least the words were that the governments of these countries had to start listening to the people. Now we see mass demonstrations in New York and even some violence now in Oakland, California, where the police shot tear gas and rubber bullets and used flash grenades on the protesters there. Looked like scenes out of Tahrir Square when there was violence there. Again, we heard President Obama talk about the Arab Spring, but now he has violent confrontations between police and demonstrators here. How do you think he can reconcile this?
He cannot. But the question is, do they get it? It is not, does he get it? It is the Congress and the Senate. From the get-go, they said, we want to make sure, I'm talking about the Republicans, the extreme Republicans, that they want to make sure that this president will fail. And the party, the Democratic Party also, did not cooperate with him from the get-go also. And they played around and tinkered around with the health care bill until they did not have enough votes, where it was watered down, where nobody's going to get anything from it except the big guys, the fat cats on Wall Street. And that is where it fell, it was a domino effect against the people of the United States. The people made their decision. They wanted Obama, fine. Why don't you work with the president, not try to make him fail? They want the president to fail. They did not talk about if the president fails, the country is failing. It was a failing economy, and they made it fail furthermore. And here we are hearing from Bank of America, the one who was bailed by the United States taxpayers and the government, they are talking about America's rating is going to be also brought down, one notch down, the credit rating. And there is nobody in the Congress or the White House or all these people who are running to run our affairs, to run us into the ground, saying anything about the economy and what concrete stuff on the ground they are going to do. You know, I'm not worried about Romney and all these people around him, but I'm worried about the president himself. What is he doing for me, the ones who voted for him, and what is the Congress doing? Republicans, Democrats, and the Tea Party. The Tea Party, I equate it to another anarchist party that will bring down the whole House in order for their activist, extreme right-wing activist agenda passes through, where the 90% of the Americans who are not middle class, who are really still fueling whatever fuel the economy has, they're trying to bring that 90% down.
Right. Paul, let me ask you, we hear a lot of people with the Occupy movement. We heard some with the Tea Party movement before it was basically taken over by the Republican infrastructure. But they seem to have a total disgust for the two-party system, for the entire system of government. Whether you talk to them about the courts, the Congress, the White House, the lobbyists, and this whole construct that's been developed. Do you think that this is really not so much a reaction against policies, but maybe a reaction against the system? I mean, we heard that last in the 60s. It was a revolt against the system. Well, you know, of course, we had Vietnam in the draft. But do you think this is anti-system or just anti-politician?
Well, it is anti-system, and there's some of that impetus in the early Tea Party insurrection, if you want to call it that, and it's certainly that is characteristic of the Occupy movement, which is consciously, you know, trying to bring some of the spirit of what they call Arab Spring to our country. But, you know, the system is not a very good servant of most of the people. We don't have a very authentic democracy in our country. We have what I call a republic of the rich. And, you know, who else gets to participate and benefit from it is a matter of luck and strategy, but not a matter of intention. And people understand that. Across the political spectrum, they understand that, you know, the apparatus, the institutions that govern our society are not necessarily there for their benefit. They're self-perpetuating. They serve the 1%, but they don't serve most of the needs of most of the people very well. And so if you're going to have authentic democracy, people are going to have to reject institutions that don't serve well.
You know, the thing about the system, let's also bring the world system into this system. The socialist communist system has failed its people. It was written in a nice way, but it was the crooked ways of applying it have made it fail and fail big time. And I think the capitalist system also has failed the people it was trying to help, and it helped only, like Paul, right, said, you know, it's the top maybe 5%, even not 10%, or maybe 1% who stole all that money, stashed it away between here and Europe on yachts, on jets, and all that stuff. And the system, the world economic system, has failed the people of the world. And these governments at the top, whether in China or in America, whether in Europe or in Africa, whether in Africa or the Middle East. And I think it's about time for the people of the world to take back the initiative in order to put the world back together, where we can deal with each other, not enforce our ideas and ways of living on others. We have to accept the world as it comes, and I'm talking about not just America, Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. They have to accept each other and work with each other, not trying to bring down each other. And if we continue along these lines, within 10 years, there won't be any economy around the world, and we'll be going in the trash looking for something to eat.
Well, we asked some people here on the street here in Washington what they thought of President Obama and his attempt to get jobs, and here was their responses.
I think it will help long term, but currently I don't think it's going to be an immediate fix like some people are saying. I think it's going to take a little bit of time to actually get there. I mean, I don't see things change for at least another 2 years, but I mean, let's see. I'm hoping for the best.
You know, I really haven't had a chance to look into the jobs plan, but being a Democrat, I mean, I support Obama and his policies. that's really all I have to say about that. I hadn't really looked into it, so I wouldn't know.
Well, personally, I think the economy is going to stay like this for a couple of years or maybe more. I mean, we are having a lot of problems both in Europe and in the US. And I think values and ways of doing have to change until everything can be in a better way.
My personal opinion is that government can create jobs. I think there's a lot of people who say that it can't, but I don't think you can cut taxes enough for people to create jobs in the private sector if there is no demand. What there is demand for is a lot of things in the public sector, infrastructure, bridges, that sort of thing. So in that sense, yeah, I think we can prop up the economy for a certain amount of time. But until some real fundamentals change that allow demand, true demand, to pick up, it's going to be a tough road to hoe. We lost a lot of personal wealth all of a sudden in 2008. It's going to take a while to come back. Government needs to help, and ultimately the private sector will be the engine that drives us to the levels that we'd like to see.
Well, yeah, we hear so much about the 99, and we've talked about the 99 percenters and the 1 percenters, and now the media has gotten some criticism how they're covering this. All the anchors were dropped into Tahrir Square during the Arab Spring movement in Egypt. There was a lot of coverage, more than you would expect for what happened in Tunisia. It started with the individual who burned himself.
Bouazizi.
Right, Bouazizi, who burned himself to death. So there was coverage of that, but now the coverage here, when this is happening in this country, you've got, of course, Fox News calling these people smelly bums, all kinds of names, but even the other networks have not given these protests a lot of attention. Now we have the police moving in quite brutally in places like Oakland, but also I understand there's been some incidents in San Diego and Atlanta as well with the police. Let me go to you first, Eric. Do you think that the media really understands what they're dealing with? We've even heard some protesters say it's going to be Occupy Media next. Apparently, there's already a protest group in front of Fox Studios in Los Angeles. Do you think their day may be coming here, that they're a little bit glib on this right now, but they're seen as part of the system as much as Congress and Goldman Sachs are seen as part of the system?
Yeah, I can see that. But generally, though, just for the media here, I think it's a difficult story for media to wrap their head around. I mean, if you're dealing with Egypt or Tunisia, there's more of it's an easier story to sort of pick up. You don't like this government. You want to do certain things. The Occupy Wall Street movement is more vague. And it actually it doesn't have the kind of focus that makes it easier. I mean, basically, a lot of media is not so much corrupt as lazy. And it's a difficult story. You have to get in there. You have to really understand it. You have to be able to challenge some assumptions about the culture. And it's not boiled down to a quick sort of outline or a press release. But I have to say, I did appreciate a story that was in the Washington Post a few days ago, where they actually compared and contrasted Tea Party members with Occupy Wall Street, and K Street, Occupy K Street, and they did a very good job of sort of outlining the similarities between Tea Party beliefs and Occupy Wall Street beliefs, and there was a number of points.
Even President Obama compared them yesterday in a speech in San Francisco.
And it's true, and I'll tell you, there was a research done by the Pew Center for People in the Press earlier this year. They do a political typology every 4 years where they interview thousands of people and do an analysis. And what they really found, on the continuum of political opinion in the United States, it's not as simple as you would think. You've got a substantial number of Republicans who do not like Wall Street, that do not trust Wall Street. They're Republican on everything else, but if you ask them about corporations, they have very similar feelings to people who you would, liberal Democrats who, you expect to have those feelings. So it's very complicated, and I think what America is doing, and I think is part of the world as well, is there is a rebellion of this notion of privilege, that there's this people, this 1%, that the game is rigged. And I think that's a more complicated story to get across, and that's why it's difficult for the media to do that. Plus, the media is embedded in the corporate world. That makes it even more challenging to get the story across because it's inherently challenging to the entities that employ the reporters. So it's it's difficult for American media to tell the story.
Right. Mohammed, yes.
Let me say something about the media. The media became around the world, not just here in the United States, and especially in the United States, became an activist media. It is the mouthpiece of the corporation that controls that media outlet, or the corporation who feeds the advertisement money. And you cannot find the truth on the media anymore. I just came back from a month trip around the world, a full circle around the world, plus another halfway around the world and back. And I could not find where the truth is from the media, from China all the way to here and back over to the Middle East and back. Because you hear the point of view of the one who controls the money, whether in the Arab world, whether in China, whether in London, whether it is here. The one who controls money control what message you are going to hear and how they are going to spin that message to benefit the people who are benefiting from them, like on at the Congress and the Senate or on Wall Street. So I think if there is no reform of the media itself and the message itself around the world, I think these movements, especially the Occupy Wall Street movement, they need their own outlet, or they need somebody to really put the news, not just their protest. Sometimes protest is ugly. Protest does not look good, and that's what gave Fox News, who are, the heart of the extreme right-wing, hateful bunch of journalists. That what gave them, an end into the movement of Occupy Wall Street. There is nobody now who's covering the movement, not just what they are doing on the street, but why they are doing what they are doing on the street. What is behind this movement? Why are we revolting? Why crime is going up around the world, including the United States? Crime is going up. But I just came back also from North Carolina, which is south of the Mason-Dixon line. And the only television station you see anywhere you go, it is Fox News, as if it is the truth, nothing but the truth. Right. So help them God, not help me God, because God will help me if I look for the truth, not watch that so-called truth that they put on.
Right. Well, before we get to you, Paul, I want we asked some people on out here on the street what they think about the news coverage, and here are their responses.
The recession, the financial issue of America, I think they've covered that way too much. I mean, we all know what the situation is, but they just keep reminding us, and I think that's kind of contributing to it actually staying the way it is.
I think there's been a lot of focus on the problems with the House Republicans and the Democrats and the president. I think that a lot of too much attention has been played to that in a negative role, and really kind of hindered the recovery of this country in general. Yeah, I definitely think so.
I could say very easily the elections, the presidential elections. The presidential elections now have a 3.5-year election cycle. So as soon as one president is elected and you have the inauguration, the election cycle immediately starts. So right now we're a year out from the elections, and I'm almost completely burnt out from it. I'd like to see more coverage of actual issues in depth rather than this sort of jockeying back and forth that's kind of meaningless until we have the first primary.
Well, Paul, you heard a couple of people talk about they thought there was too much attention. I think the last individual was talking about the constant presidential campaign cycle. The speculation starts the morning after, of course, the new president's elected. We're talking about the next, and then it's always, as we get closer in, as we see now, the Chris Matthews, the other pundits, all talking about the inside baseball type political situation. Where does Romney part his hair, and where does how much did Herman Cain charge for his pizzas? I mean, do you think this is what people are objecting to, that the news media is not giving them what they want to hear, but giving each other, these pundits, these some of them aren't even journalists. They came out of they were staffers on the Hill. That right. This is what they're upset about?
I think especially in Washington, I suppose it's a temptation that's hard to resist. Reaching for the easy stuff, the low-hanging fruit. Let's keep talking about the election campaign. Let's just keep talking about the political parties and their machinations on the Hill. you can get preoccupied. Let's keep talking to each other. You can get preoccupied with that, and I think the major media institutions usually do. You know, to really dig and go searching for stories, you know, other veins, other themes that are percolating through our society is more work. But journalists are supposed to dig and not, you know, and not just work the easy stuff. You know, I think, you know, the Occupy Wall Street movement seems to be a surprise that major media has taken weeks to try and figure out how to respond to and cover. But you know, they represent, you know, more than a few veins of groundwork and agitation and people paying attention. If you go to the occupations and talk to people at length, and not just for spiffy sound bites, but you know, listen to them, you'll find out there's vision, there's philosophy, there's thoughtfulness there. There's a different sense of what they want from the world, want from our society, than you're going to get from Meet the Press on Sunday morning. But it's not insignificant, and you know, I wish it could get more traction, and I wish it wouldn't have had to wait till October when Occupy, you know, September and October when these occupations took hold. You know, that's been building for a long time, and people haven't seen it coming because they haven't been listening and they haven't been working at finding those stories.
Right. Well, one thing I always was told here in Washington with the corporate journalists, the one place you won't find many of them are shoe repair shops, because they really don't wear out their shoe leather, what they do here in this town. But Eric, I forget who said this, but somebody recently said that because Obama doesn't have a primary challenger, the Occupy movement is actually serving as his de facto primary challenger, because this movement, even though some people in the White House have tried to hijack it for the White House purposes, it hasn't worked so far. What do you think about that idea that it's the Occupy movement more so than the Tea Party movement, that's acting as a Democratic challenger to Obama for this election cycle?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting observation, and I think it's a useful way of seeing it. I mean, I think what you've got is, you know, a spontaneous voice, you know, for a candidate that doesn't exist, but for a belief that's out there that these concerns are not being met by anyone in government and according to the political sort of lay of the land by Obama. And these folks are sort of speaking up in a way, sort of demanding things, sort of a something akin to the sort of a political bonus army, you know, where people are coming up and it's like it's not like they want their actual World War I bonus, right? But they actually are rising up.
Which didn't have a happy outcome here when they were.
It did not, and it's just much like Oakland. But what they're saying, they're demanding something, and they want the government that they believe in, and they have a faith in government that's actually somewhat deeper than most people would think, and they're just tremendously disappointed. I mean, they see government as we the people, right? That, you know, this is a collective. You know, let's put it this way: the pursuit of happiness for folks in the Occupy movement is not some sort of buying a flat screen TV. It is a collective notion of building a better world. And folks in the Occupy movement would see, it's like, look, we can do this. We can work together. This can be a better place. We can deal with all sorts of social ills and problems and everything. But we have a system that's not doing that, and we are deeply disappointed, and this is the only way we feel like we can let that disappointment be shown.
Mohammed, I want to ask you, one of the things that triggered, of course, a lot of anger with the Arab Spring in Tunisia and Egypt was the fact that there were a number of demonstrators were killed by the police. Now, apparently there was a very serious injury in Oakland. A tear gas canister hit somebody that knocked unconscious. Now, God forbid that someone gets killed who's a protester by the police, but if that were to happen, do you think in the United States that would be a game changer, that we would see a lot more anger if someone, and we'd see a martyr. We've heard this word is used a lot in the Middle East, martyr. But if we had a martyr here, do you think that could change things and get more people out and basically, really fire up the American people against the government and the police?
Well, it won't raise the people up against the government, but it will be a wake-up call for the government, the people way at the top, from the FBI down, and on the local police force, and especially there are many activist policemen also, activists meaning right-wing or the other side, but mainly it is right-wing activist policemen who may be brutal in their behavior against the demonstrators. And then it will be a wake-up call for the system altogether. We can go down the street. Anything is possible nowadays. When you starve people, when you starve an ant, a little ant, when you starve her or you put her in a corner, or him, if it is a male ant, they'll fight back and bite you. And people will fight back and bite. So what is happening, what happened in the Middle East, it was systems that were broken, supported by the West, supported by the United States government. And when the United States government saw what is happening in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Libya, and in Yemen, even though the president of Yemen is a close friend of the United States, they lifted the cover. They said they distanced themselves from the criminal who is at the top of the pyramid. Now here, I think the president is going to have to wake up and realize that he is the president of the United States and he cannot take on any of these people on the street. Especially the Occupy Wall Street party, it is not a party represented in Congress and the Senate, and they are trying to unseat him or take his seat away from him. They are trying only to refocus the priorities of the United States people. What do they need from the elected officials? And unfortunately, we did not get, the people of the United States, they did not get anything from the Republicans or the Democrats. In fact, I think there are more people who got wealthier now than maybe during the Bush administration, because they are still playing with Wall Street. I mean, imagine that the price of gold goes up at the same day the stock market is going up. It doesn't work this way. The real economic situation does not work this way. If the stocks are up, the gold will go down because of strength of the U.S. markets and the strength of the dollar. Both of them rose at the same time because there are people in the back rooms of Wall Street and in London and in Paris and in Zurich who are manipulating these markets, trying to pull whatever little cash is left in the world economy. And the more they do this, they are cutting their own throat. The knife is coming closer and closer to their own throats, that people will go after them and they'll take whatever they owe. Look at Libya. He stole the money of the Libyan people. $130 billion is unaccounted for. And the people rose against him to get that money, and they will get that money. And anywhere in the world, if the things get that bad, people will rise up against any tyrant or any mismanaged government in order to put things where they belong.
Paul, I want to add, Oakland has a Democratic mayor, Jean Quan. She was in Washington when the police went after the protesters, and now there's calls for her to be recalled. There's a movement. Rahm Emanuel sent police into Grant Park, shades of Richard Daley. These are Democratic mayors. These are, in the case of Emanuel, former Obama's chief of staff. Is this another indication that the Democratic Party, just the way they react to this, Bloomberg, well, he's been a Democrat and everything, Republican, and an independent.
He's Republican.
Yeah, he's basically a Republican. Is this another indication that the Democrats don't get it? Because we see their big city mayors reacting this way to the protesters.
Well, I think they don't know where their allegiances are, or maybe they do, and it's not with people trying to speak up for their needs and for a different vision of the country. It's with the status quo, and that's what's pitiful about the Democrats as a so-called imagined to be a party of the left somehow. It's not. It's an illusion, and there are folks who feel like Obama and the Democrats have a monopoly on everything to the left of Attila the Hun. And it's not true, and that's partly what this uprising of people in the United States has had to say. But the United States, you made a very good point. The United States' particular crisis is part of a much broader, more comprehensive global crisis that's having a lot of dimensions. They're having economic heart attacks in Europe. They're having, democratic uprisings in North Africa and the Middle East. We're seeing folks hit the wall here on the suffering that they're going through, and people in the United States are suffering. There's hunger, there's unemployment, there's insecurity.
Foreclosures on homes. Foreclosures on homes. People being thrown on the street.
This is stuff that hasn't happened at this intensity in decades and decades, and people are scared, and they're scared because they haven't seen the end of it in over 3 years, and they don't see the end in sight, and accept the apprehension that it could get a lot worse before it gets better. And if Obama's going to preside over continuing polarization and continuing misery and intensifying misery, then he's going to have a resistance on his hands.
And some media has been accused of talking up the economy when it's going down. The CNBC's Fox Business Channel, because they have a vested interest in talking it up when in fact it's crumbling.
It's all relative. It's
right.
Going up for some people and going down for a lot of other people. There's not one economy. There are several different economies going on.
Right.
And a lot of them aren't good.
Well, we asked some folks on the street where they see the media missing the boat on the news coverage, and here are their answers.
I would say probably details in regards to what's actually happening overseas. They've kind of kept us informed. However, I do believe that some things are not really been, portrayed to us in the way they really are. I think I heard something about them bringing all the troops home or something at the end of the year, but they're not really giving a date or all that stuff. So details, I would say.
Well, I just think that certain events in the news get covered with a greater attention than other similar events in different parts of the world, particularly natural disasters and things like that get a lot more coverage in the Western world and in countries that we're allied with. And then people for example, in the Turkish earthquake that just happened, there was another earthquake of a similar magnitude, but it occurs elsewhere in the South Pacific and smaller islands. So of course it doesn't get the same amount of attention because it doesn't get the same scope of people, but it's still a devastation. It is compared one article with 15 of the same type.
I would like to see them cover the same things that they do now, but just a little bit more in depth. There are a lot of things that are covered almost in sound bites, whether it's in print or in electronic media. Let's go and dig a little deeper and find out the intellectual side of both arguments on any side of a different issue and give people enough information to make a true decision rather than just that anecdotal type of reporting that we see so often.
Well, speaking of sound bites, let's talk a little bit about the coverage of what's going on in Europe right now. We remember what happened in England. There were these basic riots. Now the British police have come out and said these were not organized gangs, as we were led to believe originally, that this was some sort of organization behind this. These were some sort of criminal gangs. A lot of these were impromptu. People upset about their benefits being taken away, and they just hit the street violently. But that's not the way it was reported here, and certainly not from the news feeds we're getting from the BBC and Sky News. Greece too. We were told, these people have great pensions and they've been living on easy street. They're talking about cab drivers and fishermen who work hard for a living. That they've had it so good. And now the EU is saying they have to, it's time to pay the bills. When in fact it was the Greek government and the Greek banks that sold out to the major banks of Europe, and the people of Greece had nothing to do with this situation. Do you think that the media, go to you first, gets it when it comes to covering this worldwide phenomenon? Because we talked about this is not just here; it's all over the world. What's occurring?
Well, we've talked about it in different ways today. I think the lack of depth in media coverage. They don't even do a good job reporting here. There's a tremendous lack of skill and ability, and even just forward resources that are out there from U.S. news outlets, just actually having their own people. Just look at the networks. So historically, I used to have bureaus everywhere, and now all those have been shut down, and it's even more complicated to talk about, news events in other countries, because you even have to do more work trying to explain what's happening. And they don't even want to explain the U.S. presidential elections very well. So, how are you going to actually get into sort of explaining what's happening with Greece or what's happening in England, what's happening anywhere? It's just exponentially more complicated, and there's just much less likely to make it very, very simplified, because that's really all the capacity that they have.
Do you think there's a willfulness on the part of the media not to make this look like a global insurrection, for lack of a better term, because that will send the wrong message, that this is global in nature, not just in Oakland or San Diego or Philadelphia?
Well, I think the movement around the world, it is not a contagious something. No, it is inherent in the genes of the people of the world who look around. Take it from, you mentioned Greece. The Europeans and the Eurozone thought they can bring Greece on board in order to be their backyard playhouse for them to go on vacation, and they did not want the benefits of the European community to go into Greece. And then they tricked the Greek government, and they believed that they are part of the Eurozone and the European community. At the same time, they kept feeding them and loaning them money, knowing that the Greek government cannot afford, and the economy cannot afford, to pay back these billions and maybe up to $1 trillion in loans and the interest rates that they were charging them. The Greek economy, they were paying only interest. That's the only thing they could afford, is interest, until the whole world economy collapsed, and then they cannot even pay the interest now. Now, I think, and I agree with the Occupy Wall Street movement, that I think somebody is going to have to take a haircut, and it is not the people of the world, and it is not the poor people of the world. It should be the people who are living in these ivory towers up there, who stole the money, who swindled the money, who allow them to swindle the money too. George Bush, when he left from here with a lot of billionaires and millionaires from the people who were around him, the people who ripped off Iraq into pieces, who took a lot of money. There is corruption in the supplying the U.S. forces in Afghanistan. What does he have to show for it? What do we have to show for it after the occupation of Iraq, except the murder of 4,500 American soldiers and maybe 1 million Iraqis, and the murder of a president of a country? That is it. We did not achieve anything. In fact, if we did anything in that region, we added to the destabilization of that region, which was volatile. But now the economy came to bite everybody in the rear end, and I think it started with George Bush. And I don't want to be here attacking only George Bush, because Obama is making also the same mistakes and continuing to say, oh, I did not do it, it was George Bush. Mr. Obama, we voted for you in order to correct what George Bush
did.
And
even Joe Biden, the vice president, has said, hey, this is our economy now. We've been here now over 2 years. This is us.
Well, that's very bad. If this is his economy, I wonder who in the world is going to save this country, because the Republicans have drove it into the ground, and then now Biden is claiming it as if it's his economy. Go out to the street and see what's happening to the people. We are in very bad shape. If this is his economy, we need maybe an outsider to come run for president of the United States.
Right. Yes. Well, let me ask you. This whole issue about the economy and the media kind of fiddling while Rome burns, acting like Nero. Again, do you think that the media is consciously trying to talk up things like, oh, there'll be a solution in Greece, there'll be a solution to the euro, when in fact the recent word out of Europe is that if the Italian government falls, as it may, the euro is gone, and that the Deutschmark is being printed, and the euro will not be and that the EU itself could collapse, and how's this going to? What's the domino effect of this around the world with the euro collapsing? But do you think that the media may be looking at, oh, that's a conspiracy theory, when in fact it's not, but they're looking at it as a conspiracy theory?
Well, I don't know whether they see it as a conspiracy theory or not, but I guess there's a human reflex to hope for the best and hope that the calamities will come to an end shortly. Maybe it's something as simple as that, but that's the only story you're getting, and they're really, they're really missing the depth and extent of the pain and the implications of that. I don't think we have a concerted national or global uprising, but we certainly have, long-standing discomfort and anxiety and distress and unhappiness that people are expressing, in Egypt or Tunisia or Libya or Greece or Italy or Wall Street or Oakland. People really are worried that things are going to get much, much worse. Not just stay as bad as they are and not end soon, but that things could get much more calamitous. We're not building a world that's suitable for everybody to live with some security and confidence in, and people are just not going to be indifferent to that. And the press needs to pay attention to that. They really just need to get out of their, out of their easy, comfortable habits, out of their cul-de-sac, and dig around for those real currents that are out there that could really, take us to a much more distressing place than we're at presently.
Well, the question here is, can the press, the current press agencies and these television stations and all these people, can they change their ways, or we need a new press? Because I don't think they can, or they would dare to show the real truth about what's going on, because they are connected to Rupert Murdoch, to all these big conglomerates who control the message because of certain political agendas they have. So I don't think the media, the current media, CNN, CNBC, NBC, ABC, all these quantitative, I call them, they are only quantity, but they have no quality to reflect what is going on around the world, including Al Jazeera, including many local. Even in Iran, there are some press agencies that you are not getting everything from them. Mm-hmm. I think the world is in a very bad need for a new rise. Like when Al Jazeera rose, it wasn't Al Jazeera only for one or other color. They were showing both sides of the story. Unfortunately, now we are seeing only one side of the story, and it's an agenda television station like everybody else around the world. Staying in China for a month this year, all what I saw was CCTV 24, which is 24 hours of the same message. It reminded me exactly of the CNN headline news. They repeat the same thing, like they are schizophrenic and they are obsessive compulsive about the same thing all the time, trying to drive one message home. Mm-hmm. And here you come to the United States, I don't care where you flip to if there are any liberal television stations or the right-wingers, it's the same message, but they present it to you differently without the real truth into the subject. There is no real truth. I think we need to find the truth in alternative media, maybe. We need to go to alternative media where we'll compete. I mean, I'm talking about we because I am we the people. The people have to find it in alternative media and let these big conglomerates who are charging us $65 a month in order to get a signal and to see what? There is nothing there to see. Yes. You are building their ivory tower, so we need to take that money out, because $65 with 50 million households, that's a lot of bread. That's a lot of money. So take that money away from them and put it in alternative media and let them feel that, you know what, the people are tired of you and your politicians and your economists. We want our turn now. And goodbye, Mr. Media Man.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, there's most of the media institutions have an allegiance to maybe allegiance to a corporation, maybe an allegiance to an ideology, but they're very they narrowcast. They're very narrow and very shallow frequently, repeating the same thing. And I think what you saw in Africa, and what you see to some extent in this uprising is social media are just it's going around the constraints of institutional media, and we certainly need something better to happen. We need a megaphone for those voices.
It's not something better. We need to really get rid of what we are being fed. All that is trash. To me, it's garbage what they are trying to feed us. They are trying to keep their man and the man who controls the money in power and his office. We need to cut that money and go, not even social media. Sometimes people tell you, you are liberals, social media means you are anti-everything. No, call it alternative media, the people's media, and move forward.
Right.
Right. We do need.
And this is what the 99% are basically asking for, right?
And I would say, I mean, we have to take a step back. I mean, I think some folks there's just a certain romanticization of some sort of past, media, better coverage. And really, media has always responded to whoever owned it. I mean, newspapers have always responded to their publishers for like political endorsements. But really, what you've had is the concatenation, of the conglomeration, and with the drop of certain rules in the FCC rules for licensing, for broadcast fairness doctrine, those sorts of things,
right.
we really allowed for to crowd out, But I mean, media has always been controlled by the person it owns. I mean, if you buy the ink, it's your
Right.
story.
Right.
But we can but it used to be when you had a greater diversity of sources, like when a town had several newspapers, then there was a certain competition.
Right.
And then you also bought the paper that more closely aligned to your political beliefs anyway. I mean, New York City is one of the few places in the country now in the U.S. that you have that. People buy the Post, people buy the Times. Those are different kinds of folks, right? But we've lost that.
Right.
And then when it's become, it's just like capitalism's not good for food, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's not good for media because of the concatenation. But we do have an opportunity, I think, as long as we have net neutrality laws, to be able to have an internet media that would allow. I mean, I'm still constantly amazed at the information that you can get from revolutions happening around the globe. I mean, in real time.
Right.
Streamed in real time. I mean, I remember when I was a kid in Akron, Ohio. If you wanted to get the newspaper from from Paris, France, it took a couple weeks for the actual paper to get to the library.
Right.
And now it's like it's here.
Right.
So you've got a tremendous opportunity to sort of connect and understand in real time in a less mediated way.
Right. Well, is it a withdrawal or an eviction? President Obama announced that all U.S. troops would be out of Iraq by the end of the year. But this decision came after a failure to negotiate a status of forces agreement with Iraq. And what about all those private contractors and that mega U.S. embassy complex in Baghdad? U.S. troop withdrawal from Iraq by the end of the year. Is it really a withdrawal, or are we going to see a lot of people staying as advisors, contractors, and all different? Obviously because of the status forces agreement, the uniformed troops are coming home. But what about the continued U.S. presence there? A lot of people think that it will remain. What do you think?
Yeah, I can't see how it would go. I mean, too many people are making too much money, and there is too much of an vested interest in the military-industrial complex to have a presence there. And you have to be able to do certain window dressing on it, and it's at least you get the uniform folks out. But there is just no way. There will be a substantial presence.
Right. Before I get to the rest of our panel, we asked some people on the street what they thought about this quote-unquote withdrawal, and here's their answers.
I think that some will come, but not all. That's about it. Not all of them.
I think that's the right step to take. And I know that even Bush had been talking about a timeline of removing our troops that, we were way past. So I think at this point that it's necessary that we get them out of Iraq and keep like a core group of, infrastructure that's necessary to aid transition in the country, not entirely abandon it, which is, I think, the general plan. But I think that it would be important for us to get out of that country, the same way that we've gone out of Afghanistan, but to maintain contact and ensure that that was all for nothing. You know what I mean? At the end of it, you have to make sure that it was a terrible decision in the first place, but we've done it, so we have to stay with it until it's done. We have to count our losses, but at the same time, aid transition, if that makes sense.
Well, I don't know. I'm not very much in international policy, so I don't know, and that's a question of every country to decide. I think he's doing in a way that troops might come back. That's what I think. But it's great trouble in the Islamic countries, and I don't know exactly what the agreements are on that. So,
a welcome announcement, but it was one that was made actually by President Bush. His administration set the agenda. So the thing that makes me happiest about it is to see the hand-holding on a policy from one administration to the next. The Bush administration made the promise, and the Obama administration kept it. And that's the type of continuity that's going to make us have a successful federal government again.
Well, Mohammed, you heard him say a continuity from Bush to Obama. A lot of people would say that's the problem rather than an asset. This is showing there's not a whole lot of difference. But do you think that the U.S. will effectively end its military presence in Iraq, or will the devil be in the details through advisors, contractors, etc.?
The details that they already signed on are the devil itself. I am totally opposed to contractors, because the contractors who we have seen in Iraq and in Afghanistan are nothing but a bunch of criminals who committed crimes against the indigenous people and against the Iraqis, and they killed hundreds of Iraqis in cold blood, and they are here free in the United States because they were contractors for the State Department. And in one way or another, they were brought here, they get a slap on the hand, and that's it. I'm against contractors staying behind. America is a sovereign country, Iraq is a sovereign country, and two sovereign people can decide what is their future relationship should be. And it should not be, like I said, with al-Maliki, it should be with the Iraqi people, and they have to vote on how they want to move forward with their relationship to the United States. And the United States have a moral obligation because they wrecked the whole system in Iraq.
Do you think that the troops are coming home, but maybe the troops are staying there, not maybe as troops, but as contractors?
Well, I think it's hard to imagine, I don't take the announcement at face value. Come back in January, and there are going to be lots of U.S. personnel in Iraq under lots of auspices. And, we've talked about media. A question in my mind is whether media are going to actually scrutinize that, or they're going to give the Obama administration a pass when they say, oh, we only have 150 soldiers there now, we're all done. There's going to be a lot of U.S. personnel, and there's going to be a lot of money involved in shaping and trying to shape Iraq for U.S. interests for a long time to come. And we ought to own up to that, and we ought to scrutinize it, and we ought to try and resist it. So I think we need, that's the truth of the matter. And I hope that it gets examined, that announcement leads to other questions. So you bring a lot of U.S. Army personnel home, U.S. military personnel home. They're going to come home and do what? They're going to, because there's jobs for them.
Obama said we should, the clinics around the country should hire some of the
you're compounding
nurses, I guess.
The domestic problem with a lot of people being decommissioned, possibly. And at the same time that we're announcing a troop withdrawal that I think is a little illusionary. We're putting troops into East Africa. We're continuing to extend our presence in Afghanistan, and we've been in Iraq. We have 20 years of death and destruction we visited on Iraq that needs to be addressed and made good for. And I just suspect that we're going to continue under the table to keep visiting harm on Iraq instead of good.
Right. Eric, on the issue of the troops coming home, we're already hearing some word out of Baghdad. Well, maybe some troops might have to stay, and now we hear the interim council of Libya saying, well, maybe NATO will have to stay in Libya until the end of the year. First it was the end of October, now the end of the year. Are these slippery slopes that the U.S. is either getting into because it has desire to get into them, or we're being led, in the case of Libya, by other countries like France and Britain? This overextension now, U.S. troops going to Uganda, U.S. troops maybe going into Somalia. There's certainly some military. Is this just the overextension of our troops, so Iraq is over and it opens up another front somewhere else?
Well, there is a certain something to be said and for bureaucratic inertia. I mean, once you get a system moving and once you have an infrastructure in place, I mean, a bureaucracy wants to keep itself going and often finds a justification for its existence. I mean, that could be a lot of a driver. I mean, you've got a substantial infrastructure that's been built up that, doesn't necessarily want to be drawn down. And say, well, we can here, we can be there. I mean, I'm sure that's something to consider when we look at the issue. If you've got, what's the saying? Is if you have a hammer, all your problems look like nails. It's just that's where you can go to move your policy along, and because you've really diminished a lot of your other options because you have gone to this sort of wartime footing with a substantial part of the world. So where else are you going to go?
Right. Quickly, we've only got a couple minutes left, but do you think that Obama can use this troop withdrawal from Iraq as an asset in his re-election in 2012? Because we've heard people say, hey, it was Bush that really set the timetable, but do you think Obama will try to claim credit for this?
If Obama have succeeded in the healthcare debate, and if he succeeded in shoring up the economy, then he could have been able to say it was his success in Iraq. But having failed at everything he tried to do, this is another failure for the Obama administration.
Paul, what do you think? Is this something that he's going to wave the flag on? He'll obviously be there when the last troops come off of the plane, or the first troops come off the plane, wherever they get off the plane.
I think he'll try his best to make the most of it, but I think Mohammed's right. I think he might not get very much. He might not get as much mileage out of it as he wishes.
Mm-hmm. And Eric, what do you think? Do you think that this will become a rah-rah around the flag type?
Well, there was a joke I had heard, I can't take credit for it, about him looking for the mission accomplished banner somewhere in the closet at the White House. And so I'm sure he will. I'm sure he will. I mean, I'm sure. I mean, it's an important issue to a lot of people who don't, who won't look at it too closely. He can say, "Yeah, I did it." But at the end of the day, I think the economic issues are really going to drive, and I think it'll be a blip. And considering the war on a more practical level in the United States has affected a very small percentage of the population everywhere. It's not like World War II where everyone was gone. It's still a very small portion, the socioeconomic strata, that had actually been touched by the war. Now, and everyone else, it's news.
Right.
Yeah. There was a commercial on television in the 1980s. Mr. President, where is the beef?
Where's the beef?
That is my question.
That'll be the last word. Okay, I want to thank our panel for joining me this week on Deadline, and please join us again next week for another edition of Deadline. I'm your host, Wayne Madsen.